Hello, music lovers. I am Trevor Williams, and welcome back to Sound Approach, where we discuss all things audio and video. Today, we're diving into the world of speakers, asking questions catering to every level of expertise. Whether you're a novice looking to elevate your sound, an intermediate listener fine-tuning your setup, or an audiophile in pursuit of sonic perfection, hopefully this video has something for you when considering the purchase of new speakers. As always, we're joined by our in-house audio expert with over 50 years of experience, DJ Taylor. Welcome, DJ. How are you today?
Trevor, I am incredible.
Great. That is excellent news.
Hey.
And fantastic to hear.
Yes.
Well, let's dive in and begin with our first question. To start, we're going to cover some of the considerations a novice audio listener may be thinking about when purchasing speakers for the first time.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right. Well, let's start off with what are the different types of speakers that are available?
Trevor, you have 5, 6, 7, 8 different types of speakers. You have bookshelf speakers, tower speakers, center channel speakers, subwoofers, in-ceiling speakers, in-wall speakers, on-wall speakers, sound bars.
So there's all sorts of different speakers.
Yes.
Do you need an amplifier to power all of these different speakers?
All but active speakers.
For everything but active?
Everything but active.
Okay, and there's active and passive. Passive are the more commonplace, correct?
That is correct. And then for an active speaker, you need a low-level input signal, not a speaker lead type of signal.
And what is a low-level input?
Well, a low-level is like a preamp output, the signal that is very low that comes from a preamp that goes into the power amp. So it's a very small amount of signal because the amplifier that's built into the speaker boosts it up and make things happen.
Okay.
Or it could be Bluetooth.
It could be Bluetooth, so
Yes.
you're getting a wireless signal.
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. Well, what is the receiver for, and what considerations need to be addressed regarding this piece of equipment when purchasing speakers?
The receiver is a single chassis device that has an amplifier built onto it, a preamplifier built onto it, and generally the AM/FM tuner.
Okay.
If it's without the tuner, it's referred to as an integrated amplifier.
Okay.
So in our world, we generally deal with AV, audio-video receivers, one chassis, everything built together, compact, ready to go, speaker leads come out, go into your speakers. Life is good.
Okay. All right. And so this would be the device for like surround sounds, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, if it's not surround sound, Trevor, we would have an amplifier and a preamplifier or a 2-channel receiver.
Okay.
No surround capability, just left and right music.
Okay. And surround gives us like 5.1, 7.1.
Well, if you get into Atmos, it's 9, 11,
even higher.
and it keeps going.
Okay.
And then, of course, in those types of devices, you get a choice between a single subwoofer, 0.1, or 2 subwoofers, 0.2.
Got it. Okay. So each channel would be dedicated to your bookshelf, your tower, your surround.
Whatever speakers
Center,
you have in that grouping, the outputs off of the AV receiver or a processor of some sort or a multi-channel amplifier goes directly to your speakers.
Got it. All right. Well, moving on, I would consider myself an intermediate listener. I have some knowledge and understanding of the components involved, and I'm concerned with a decent performing system. However, like many of our clients, value is a huge consideration for me when making updates. So with those factors in mind, DJ, what should I consider when matching speakers with an amplifier?
The answer you're looking for is both simplistic and complicated. So let's deal with it from the simplistic standpoint. A speaker manufacturer sets specific specifications for that particular box.
Yes.
Okay? Power requirements. And they typically give you a low number to a high number.
Okay.
Impedance, typically from a low number to a high number. And there are other specifications that we're not going to delve into today.
Yeah.
So the critical one is the power. So if you buy a surround sound receiver or a 2-channel receiver at 50 watts, you want your speaker's specifications for wattage to be between 20 and 100.
And 100 watts.
Right.
Okay. Well, powering a system is an interesting subject all in itself, and we could dedicate an entire video to just that alone, which we'll probably do here in the future. What is the best approach when understanding the power requirements to match a speaker to an amplifier or vice versa? So like you just said, 50-watt power amplifier, you would want a 20 to 100-watt speaker.
I think the key is, how can you damage the speaker and your electronics? If you have a 25-watt amplifier and your speaker says 20 to 100 watts, your assumption is you should be able to turn your amplifier wide open and the speaker will take it, because it's only 50 watts, right? So if that's the case, once you reach a certain point on the volume controlled tracing, let's call it 12 o'clock, you're putting pure distorted signal into your speaker and you can blow it up. So
once you get past that certain point,
you can damage speakers with too little power before you'll ever damage it with too much power.
How do you damage it with too little power?
The amplifier reaches the end of its capability of giving you a pure sine wave, high quality signal, and it goes into a square wave or a clipped signal, which is pure distortion. And distortion causes the voice coils inside the speakers to erratically move, heat up, and melt a wire into. And that is a blown speaker.
So too low of power often results.
We have many times taken a 20 to 50 watt specified speaker and put a 500 watt amplifier on it and driven it too loud to be in the room. Never any harm, because there's never any clip distortion. It's just pure signal all
so
the
you
time.
get clip distortion from too low of power.
That's correct.
Versus too high of power. So when people talk about blowing speakers, it's not because they turn the volume all the way up to 11. It's because they weren't running enough power.
That is correct.
That's interesting and very key, because
Yes.
I think I think it's a misnomer that you're putting too much power into a speaker to blow it.
Well, you put too much
To some
power.
degree.
Yes, and you can put too much power into the speaker if you don't have enough power. But if you have enough power, you'll never put too much into it.
Okay. Well, one thing I've often heard you discuss beyond power is the importance of the room when thinking about speaker performance. How do I position bookshelf or tower speakers for optimal sound?
Trevor, you're right. When I receive calls at soundapproach.com from some person all over the United States, the first question I ask is, how big is your room? And I want to know width, I want to know depth, I want to know height. I also want to know, does that room have an opening that dumps into another room, like family room to kitchen?
Sure.
Because that whole space is the acoustic space you're dealing with, putting your speakers in there. So if you're taking bookshelf speakers into a small space, you're setting them on a shelf somewhere.
Yes.
The same thing happens with tower speakers. You're sitting them on the floor someplace. So the key is, does either of those speakers have ports on the back? Because if there are ports, you cannot put them too close to the wall. If you put them too close to the wall, the front energy comes out fine, then that back pressure energy is pushed out of the port. It's too close to the wall. That signal hits the wall and is out of phase with the front signal and distorts your sound. Poor quality sound. So ported speakers have to come off the wall a foot or more.
Okay.
Then the other element for positioning speakers is, where is the tweeter in relation to your ear?
That was my next question. So the tweeter needs to be aligned with your ear, correct?
Well, a tweeter is kind of like a flashlight. You shine the flashlight, it's a beam that comes out. Very few manufacturers build speakers with phenomenal dispersion, the ability to send signal left and right at a great angle. PhaseTech, who holds the patent on soft dome tweeter technology, they have very wide dispersion elements in their high frequencies.
And they also have the ability to move the tweeters within, like, their in-walls and in-seals, correct?
In their in-walls and in-seals, that is correct. Not in their bookshelves and not in their towers. So, but you could sit in front of a tower PhaseTech speaker, sit in front of the left one, you hear the right one, and you're in phase.
So the first consideration when you're purchasing new speakers is the room.
The room. Absolutely the room. So, most speakers you would set up in a room 8 to 15 feet apart from each other, something of that nature.
Okay.
If you're farther apart than that, you may take the tweeters and put them on their sides and move them in so you get them closer to your ear. If you're taking bookshelf speakers, you can put them on stands. Our ear is about 36 inches up from the floor, So you want that tweeter within that 15-degree angle of your ear.
Sure.
If it's too high, the sound goes over your head.
Because you're trying to capture that cone that's being sent out by the speaker.
That's correct.
All right. Well, moving beyond my level of expertise, many of our viewers would probably consider themselves audiophiles. Let's take this opportunity now to address some of these more esoteric questions when considering new speakers. What role does speaker cable quality play in audio performance versus the quality of the speakers themselves?
Speaker wire is the connectivity from your electronics to your speakers. And I look at the speaker wire, the interconnects, all of those cords that connect your system together as a component all to themselves.
Of course.
So, as an example, let's say you have a speaker wire that's very skinny, like lamp cord wire that you would get at our hardware store.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a 18 gauge. Well, that's very small. So how much signal can get through that small wire versus a larger gauge wire? So the larger your gauge of wire, the more signal can flow through it. Just like water flowing through a drinking straw, you don't get much. Versus a 2-inch pipe, you get a lot.
You get a lot more.
So,
and for our novice viewers out there, the lower the number, the higher, the bigger the width. Correct?
That is correct.
So
Absolutely.
if you're looking at an 8-gauge cable, that is thicker than an 18-gauge cable.
That is correct. And the larger the gauge, the better.
The larger is that
Even
across the board? Like if
absolutely.
you went down to a 2-gauge, it would be better than a 4-gauge. It would be better than a 6-gauge.
Most 2 gauges.
Or is there a limit to that?
You can't take a 2-gauge wire, hardly hook up to the speaker, and if you did, it might pull it over off of your shelf. So it's so big.
So there is a limit to what's actually manageable,
and the termination that you can put on it.
Okay.
Because you have to worry about that as well.
Of course.
Now we look at a 16-4 configuration as the first wire for someone to use in their home. Because
16 gauge.
16 gauge, 4 conductors.
4 conductors.
And we look for a wire that has 18 to 22, 24 weaves and twists per foot because we're trying to isolate the RF signal, EMI effects of signal, and other airborne interferences that happen. We are looking to shield that out.
And the easiest place to do that is on the cables versus the electronics.
Well, that's correct.
It's easier to shield from interference.
At the cable. On the cable, yes. Now, manufacturers like Trib, AudioQuest, WireWorld, these manufacturers, they build a shielding into their cable. But they start at more than $1 a foot and go up. So if you're budget-minded, 16-4, oxygen-free, high-quality copper wire, woven and twisted together properly, you have a 10-gauge wire effective.
And those will benefit you on any level of speaker that you have.
Any level. Entry level to high end.
To high end. So you can improve the speaker quality no matter the design, no matter the unit, by having good cables.
That is correct. Absolutely. Very important.
So the cables are more important than the speakers?
No, I think they're equally as important.
Equally as important.
Yes.
But they both have different impacts in different ways.
Absolutely, yes.
Understood. Well, how do the different materials in speaker construction affect sound quality? The material the cabinet is made of, for example, or the design of the diaphragm on the woofer?
Trevor, there are a lot of people that get into esoteric conversations about diamond coated diaphragms and the type of surround material that you use. But in reality, the engineer of the speaker is taking all of that into effect when they build their specific design concept on a speaker. So first I look at how dead is the cabinetry, because that solves probably 75% of the problems.
And by dead, what do you mean by dead?
If you knock on it, it doesn't ring. There's no ringing sound, no vibration inside the cabinet. No, you want that dead. So if you accomplish that, then the next thing is their design of the speaker. And the speakers we can't control what they pick, so why try?
Sure.
The real key is their crossover network. You can take apart some manufacturer speaker, and you'll find their crossover network has 2 little capacitors on it. But if you take apart a crossover network from, let's say, Canton, you could have 36 little components on that crossover network. And that network divides the signal out between each of the speakers.
Understood. So if that's the case, then what's the significance of bi-wiring or bi-amping speakers, and how much would that impact performance?
The crossover's job is to take all of the signal into one point and to divide it up amongst the number of speakers that are in the box. So if it's a two-way speaker system, that crossover network will take all the low frequencies and send it to the woofer, and all the high frequencies and send it to the mid-range tweeter. Think about this for a moment. As perfect as crossover networks are, there are still some frequency crossover points that interfere with each other. So if you have a single point entry into the cabinet, you're going to get some mid-frequency information into the woofer and some woofer information perhaps into the mid-range into the tweeter, which could smear the image of that speaker. Okay. If you have bi-wire capability, the signal into the bottom two terminals just goes to the woofer. It can't get to any other place because it's isolated. And the same thing with the mid-frequency and high frequency. So you're
that's
isolating
the benefit
that.
Of bi-wiring.
Absolutely.
Is you're isolating the signals into different cables, even though they may run through the same cable,
right,
into different inputs into the speaker, which doesn't allow for bleed.
Right.
And you get a clearer signal.
Yes. And the other factor is wattage. The amplifier is putting out, let's say, 100 watts into the speaker. The mid-range doesn't need 100 watts. The tweeter doesn't need 100 watts. The woofer needs 100 watts. So by isolating them, you're ensuring that the woofer gets all of the big power, and the other two devices get what's appropriate for them because of the separation and the crossover network.
That's through bi-wiring, not bi-amping.
Bi-wiring.
Bi-wiring.
So also bi-amping does the same thing.
Bi-amping does the same.
But in bi-amping, you have two wires coming from two amplifiers to the speaker. That's a very expensive process. And in my world, in your world, perhaps, we would never do that because it's very expensive.
Sure. But for the cleanest sound, that would be an option.
Absolutely. That is the best
if that's
option.
What you're searching for.
Yes. And the amplifiers you're going to use for that are called monoblock amplifiers.
One channel.
One channel.
Power.
Yes.
Understood. Well, perhaps the headline of this whole discussion, this is a hotly contested and debated idea among audiophiles, but I'd love to get your opinion on it. From your perspective, what is burn-in and why is it important?
Trevor, if you're into automobiles or racing and you buy a brand new put together engine and you put it in your race car, you go on the track and run around, its performance is not perfect.
Yeah, I know. I have two in my garage right now.
Okay, so based on that, as the engine, the metals seat to each other, the oils get into the crevices, the engine becomes more efficient.
After you've warmed it up.
Right.
Yes.
So based on that, then you can fine-tune, in some form, your engine so the car can go faster. We're doing the same thing with our electronics, our speaker wire, and our speakers. So the drivers, when they're built, they haven't got their pliability yet in its perfect form.
Okay.
So by burning them in, so to speak, they get seated to the best performance position, and they're going to sound better.
Okay. I know we've discussed in the past whether or not this is a scientifically provable thing, because some people think that it's not. What's your thought? What are your thoughts on that?
Trevor, can you measure the wattage output of an amplifier and its distortion level and things of that nature on an amplifier?
I believe so.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
There are measuring instruments for that. So if you take a product out of its box and measure its performance and then burn it in and measure it again, there is a difference between the two.
So you can see it when it's measured.
You can see it in measurements. You may not be able to, and eventually you can hear it. But most people can't hear some of those subtle differences. But they're there.
Okay. And it's over a period of time as well. So you're going to kind of adjust to it as it happens.
Yes, it's kind of like a light bulb. If you take an incandescent light bulb right out of the pack and screw it in, it's burning wonderful. 5 years later, it's still burning. But if you measure the lumen output
the
in the
luminosity
beginning
of it, yeah.
And the 5 years later, there's a difference in that.
I think that's a good example. You're completely used to the look of it.
And it just diminishes a little bit over time.
But it closes over.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, now that we've covered the above questions, let's circle back to the difference between active and passive speakers. We touched on it earlier, but let's dive further into this subject specifically. What is the difference between active and passive speakers?
Active speakers have amplifiers built into the speaker themselves. Passive speakers do not.
That's the difference.
Right.
Electronics in active,
no
electronics in
other
passive.
than the crossover network.
Okay.
Now, passive speakers require speaker wire.
Yes.
Active speakers could require an RCA low-level input into it, or it could be Bluetooth and you just have to plug it in the wall and get a wireless signal.
Okay. Are active speakers better for smaller setups or better for some setups than passive speakers?
The only place a active speaker to me is better is because you can't get a speaker wire somewhere. And you do have electrical plugs that you can plug into because you have to have power for the amplifiers.
Okay.
So if you can't get a wire there, the only choice is an active speaker.
Sure.
But
sure.
generally,
But if given the option, passive is the better
far
option.
superior.
Okay.
Even in the same price range.
Even in the same price range. So if you have an active speaker at $500 and a passive speaker at $500,
the passive speakers are going to sound twice as good.
why is that?
Well, because they have to spend money on the amplifier and they're taken away from the speaker.
So if you have two speakers at the same price point
Mm-hmm.
and the electronics have to be built into one to power it,
Right?
then you're sacrificing quality in the audio.
Probably in the cabinet design and in the drivers you put into the cabinet.
Okay. Well, you can connect active speakers directly to your TV, phone, computer, correct?
Absolutely, as long as the output for those devices, the active speaker has an appropriate input for that, of course.
Understood. And
or Bluetooth.
Or Bluetooth.
Yes.
Can you have Bluetooth passive speakers?
No.
No.
No electronics.
Because there's no electronics.
Right.
Okay.
Now, you could set up a Bluetooth interface to your electronics and Bluetooth through that through an aux input, and then it works fine on speaker wire.
And how would that change the audio quality? Bluetooth is notorious because there's a lot of signal interference already occurring within the home. So Bluetooth as your source
is a poor substitute for a direct source input.
Okay. Well, for our listeners that have a better understanding of these differences, we are often posed the below questions. How do you choose between active and passive speakers for a home theater system? What are the determining factors for that choice? I think you covered a little bit in one of our previous questions.
The room and whether you can get wire there.
Those
are the determination.
So what's a situation where you wouldn't be able to run wire?
It's a concrete bunker. And yes, in this market from World War II, there are some homes that have been built into old bunkers. You can't get wires anywhere. Everything has to be surfaced.
What if we're talking about a very small space that may not have room for an amplifier? Would active speakers be a good alternative in a situation like that?
Well, you're going to have an amplifier of some sort. But yes, if you can't get wire around the room, active speakers.
Do active speakers sacrifice audio quality compared to passive speakers?
I think so.
What if you have, for example, the ATC SCM19, which comes in both active and passive?
Well, Trevor, if you look at the price of those two speakers, the active one costs more. So they have built the sound quality the same. They've just added money to it for the amplification to make it an active product.
So they're the same product.
Same quality, same performance. Yes.
One includes the electronics, so it's going to be a little bit costlier.
That's correct.
But it may solve if
the
you
problem.
don't have space for an amplifier or you need to run an active speaker.
Yes.
Understood. Can you upgrade an active speaker system over time without needing to replace the speakers?
Probably not, unless the manufacturer is into a lot of computerization and they have computer software upgrades to their active speaker system. But that doesn't change the speaker's capability. It only changes the input amplifier capabilities.
Okay. How do active and passive speakers handle power distribution differently?
Well, you're limited in an active speaker to one level of power, that's built into it.
You can't adjust it.
No. But in passive speakers, you can start off with a 100-watt amplifier, go to 200 watts, go to 300 watts, go to 1,000 watts, go to monoblocks. So you can infinitely upgrade the quality of your system by changing amplifiers.
All right, understood. So there's a lot more adjustability with the passive speakers than you would have
Infinite.
with Infinite.
Yes.
Are there advantages of using passive speakers in a high-end audio setup?
I don't think so, unless you can't run wire. It always comes back to
that
wire.
So do active speakers have any advantages in terms of signal processing or room correction?
No. Typically, they'd have none of that built into them. Or they could, but that's a very high-end product.
Yeah.
And there's going to be some microphone interface to each of the speakers, and I've seen very few of those in the reasonable price range.
Okay. Well, there you have it, folks. Real and candid answers from a tried and tested audio expert. As always, we hope this discussion has been helpful to you in your pursuit of perfecting your audio setup. I think we've done a good job covering a lot of the questions audio listeners may have when approaching the purchase of a new speaker solution. So to our viewers, we'd like you to let us know what subjects you'd like to hear us discuss next by leaving a comment. Otherwise, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to visit our website at soundapproach.com. Once again, thank you for joining us, and DJ, as always, we appreciate it.
Thank you, Trevor.
Take care.
See you next time.